Hi, I'm Sean McGowan. The complex chord vocabulary and playful tradition of the jazz genre give jazz musicians a great amount of flexibility to adjust the harmony of songs as they see fit. Experienced jazz guitarists carry a full playbook of chord substitution techniques to enhance arrangements and keep their performances interesting. In this lesson, we'll take a look at some of the more commonly used substitution techniques and ways that we can use them in chord progressions. The phrase voice substitution refers to one great way to create additional color within a chord voicing while still keeping its fundamental harmonic structure intact. To see how this works, let's start the chord progression of All the Things You Are, starting with an F minor 7 chord in first inversion. Now let's look at the same chords using the 9-for-1 substitution concept. 1, 2, 3, and... A good general rule to keep in mind is any major, minor, or dominant 7th chord will take a natural 9th, but dominant 7ths may also use sharp or flat 9ths to enhance the color and create some additional tension. The E-flat 7 chord in measure 3 features a natural 9th on beats 1 and 2 before moving to a flatted 9th on beat 3. On beat 4 of the same measure, the 5th is raised. This is known as an altered dominant chord and is quite common whenever a dominant 7th chord resolves down a 5th or up a 4th to a major or minor chord, creating a 5-7-1 cadence. Let's look at those same chords, this time with the 6-for-5 substitution. 1, 2, 3, and... This substitution is a bit trickier than the 9-for-1 in that the 6ths will either be natural or flatted based on the chord's mode relative to the progression's overall key. While the last few examples showed us ways to change the voices within the chords, it's also common for jazz musicians to change the chords themselves. The simplest way to do this is by substituting one chord with another from the same diatonic scale. Before we get any further, let's take a look at what those chords are. Let's focus on diatonic 7th chords in the key of C major. But the following examples can be adapted to any key. Right, let's play the diatonic 7th chords in the key of C major. C major 7, D minor 7, the 2 chord, E minor 7, 3, F major 7, the 4 chord, G7, A minor 7, B minor 7 flat 5, also known as B half diminished, and back to the 1 chord, C major 7. Several substitutions are possible using only these diatonic chords. Here's a 2-5-1 in C. The 1 major 7th chord is also interchangeable with the 3 minor 7 chord. You can also do the same thing with the 6 minor 7 chord, replacing the 1. Similarly, the 2 minor 7 can be replaced with the 4 major 7 chord. Substitutions like these work great in 2-5-1 progressions, but also can be adapted to work in just about any diatonic progression. Experiment with them and see what sounds good to you. Now let's look at how diatonic substitutions can work under a melody. Here's a melody over a 4-bar 2-5-1 progression. 1, 2, 3, and... Now here's that same melody with 3 diatonic substitutions. First, the D minor 7 chord in measure 1 has been replaced with an F major 7 chord. And then the C major 7 chords in measures 3 and 4 have been replaced with an A minor 7 chord, the 6th chord, and an E minor 7 chord, the 3. 1, 2, 3, and... Note how the melody remains completely intact, even though it sounds slightly different over the new chord changes. This substitution technique can be extremely effective when you're playing a tune that features a lot of repeating chord changes. For instance, if a song includes 2 consecutive 2-5-1 progressions over 8 bars, you might play the first 4 measures as is and apply diatonic substitutions to the next 4, just enough to mix things up. The tritone substitution may sound like a dense subject to tackle, but it's a technique used all the time by jazz guitarists. Before we get into what it is exactly, let's take a quick look at what it does. In any 2-5-1 progression, you can substitute a dominant 7th chord a half step above the tonic in place of the normal 5-7 chord. Now here's with the tritone substitution. This creates a nice chromatically descending flow from the 2 chord, D minor 7, down to the D flat 7, sometimes called the sub 5 chord, and finally to the 1, C major 7. The definition is just a little less graceful. This move is called a tritone substitution because the D flat is the interval of a tritone, or a sharp 4 or flatted 5th, away from G, the root note of our normal 5-7 chord. Tritone substitutions can actually be used almost anywhere in place of a 5-7 chord to create a chromatic approach toward the following chord. To illustrate this, let's insert an E flat 7 chord on beat 4 of our 2-5-1 progression, serving as a chromatic approach to the D minor 7 chord in the 3rd measure. Guitarists Wes Montgomery and George Benson can be heard using tritone substitutions to great effect, even going so far as to use sub 2-5s, wherein the 2 chord of the sub 5 is inserted before the sub 5 itself. 1, 2, 3, and... Unlike diatonic substitutions, tritone substitutions incorporate chords from outside the key. And there are plenty of other ways in which to use non-diatonic chords in otherwise diatonic chord progressions. One common sound in contemporary harmony is the use of a minor 4 and flat 7-7 chords. The harmonic cadence of 1-4 minor 4 to 1 can be found in the works of composers ranging from Bach to the Beatles. The insertion of a 4 minor chord in an otherwise diatonic progression is also very common in jazz standards. This next example shows our 2-5-1 melody using F major 7, the 4 chord, as a diatonic substitute for the D minor 7, 2 chord, and F minor 6 as a colorful minor 4 substitute for the G7 chord. 1, 2, 3, and... We can take this concept a step further and add a flat 7-7 chord for a blues-like flavor. In many cases, the minor 4 chord directly precedes a 1 tonic chord. The flat 7-7 chord also moves into the 1 in a very beautiful, soulful way. Here's a B flat 7 chord in place of the F minor 6 from the last example. This works because the notes of an F minor 6 chord, F, A flat, C, and D, are almost the same notes as those found in a B-flat 7 chord, B flat, D, F, and A flat. We can also use dominant chords other than the 5-7 that act like the 5-7 chord as a colorful way to resolve to other diatonic chords. These are called secondary dominant chords, and there are 5 in each major key that resolve to chords other than the 1 chord. Essentially, we can approach any diatonic major or minor chord with its own respective 5-7 chord, creating what I like to call mini cadences within a progression that creates an effect similar to a 5-1 cadence. Okay, let's run through some diatonic chords in the key of C major. We're going to play a 1-3-2-5 progression. 1, 2, 3, and E minor 7 3, D minor 7 2, G 7 5. Now let's play the same example, but this time inserting some secondary dominants. 1, 2, 3, and C major 7 1, B 7 5 of 3, E minor 7 3, A 7 5 of 2, D minor 7 2, D 7 5 of 5, G 7 5. And here it is again. 1, 2, 3, and. Once you've got the idea, try chaining together several dominant 7th chords to create an effect called backcycling, so named because the chords move in fourths or backwards through the circle of fifths. Backcycling can be very useful when you want to create a strong sense of movement within the progression with a healthy amount of that great bluesy dominant 7th sound. I'm going to start out by just playing a simple 2-5-1 in C major. 1, 2, 3, and. Now we're going to backcycle to C major from A7. 1, 2, 3, and. Now we'll backcycle using chords on quarter notes all the way from F sharp 7 to C major 7. 1, 2, 3, and. We've already covered quite a bit of theoretical ground in this lesson, and the next substitution technique will be a particularly great addition to your harmonic palette. Let's take a look at a few different ways to approach chords chromatically. One great way to approach the 1 chord is to directly precede it with a major 7th chord rooted a half step above the tonic, also known as the flat 2 major 7 chord. This technique is particularly effective at the end of a song. Most melodies end on the tonic note over the 1 chord, a strong finish, but just a little bit too predictable. As an alternative, many jazz musicians prefer to resolve the tonic melody note with a flat 2 major 7th chord. Note that the melody note is now the major 7th of the flat 2 major 7 chord, in this case a C note within a D flat major 7th chord. This adds a striking color to the resolution. Another interesting but somewhat less common technique involves approaching a chord with a minor 7th chord from a half step above or below. Here's a 2-5-1 in C with the melody. 1, 2, 3, and. And now, with a half-step minor 7 chord approach. This approach sounds really nice heading towards another minor chord. So essentially you're preceding a minor chord with another minor 7th chord. In this case, C sharp minor 7 approaching the D minor 7 in measure 1. And it also sounds great before a major or a dominant 7th chord. Here's the A flat minor 7 approaching the G7. And then then the C sharp preceding the C major 7. We can further expand on the chromatic approach ideas by inserting a 2-5 from an adjacent key in front of a 2-5-1 progression. 1, 2, 3, and... Here, the 2-5-1, D minor 7 to G7 to C, is preceded by a minor 7th chord 1/2 step above the 2 chord, in this case, an E flat minor 7 chord approaching the D minor 7. And instead of going straight there, we're treating that E flat minor 7 chord as if it's the 2 chord of its own 2-5 progression, moving to A flat 7 for 2 beats. The phrase then resolves by moving down to the original 2-5 in the measure 2. Here's the same idea again, but this time the minor 7th approach comes from 1/2 step below the original 2 chord. This device is featured prominently in John Coltrane's Moment's Notice. Thanks for joining me for this lesson. For more fingerstyle jazz guitar instruction, check out the rest of my fingerstyle jazz guitar essentials lessons, available at acousticguitar.com. For Acoustic Guitar, I'm Sean McGowan.